And we're live.
The Hunt for Success podcast. Elton Rivas is joining us here today. Cody Steinman, Ryan McCracken on the internet search over there. It's been a little bit since we've done one of these, but since what, January, middle of January?
Yep.
It always seems kind of winter is kind of we take a little bit of a break. But glad you're with us today, Elton. I know very little about what you're doing. I've done that on purpose so we can kind of get to know each other today on the podcast, just what your dad shared with me a little bit. Your dad and I used to work together, or worked with Ryan and I for quite a while. Before we dive in, are you a Netflixer? You watch Netflix?
From time to time. We've got the Amazon Prime and Hulu and Netflix, but I mean, honestly, I haven't been like a huge TV guy for a long time. But what are you getting to, an episode or a series, or what do you got?
It was funny because there's a gal here staying at the museum who's taking her Coast Guard license. She's over from Idaho, so she's staying here while she's taking her education for that. And I was trying to describe what you do, and I know very little about it. And she goes, "Oh, like the Fire Festival." Have you seen that documentary?
I have seen. I've seen both of them. So and actually, my wife and I just watched it while we were on the Oregon coast, like probably a month ago. So there's some irony there, but yeah.
So I didn't know there was two.
So there's one on Netflix and there's one on Hulu, and each of them have a little bit of a different angle as to what was good, what was bad, who's responsible, who's accountable, all those types of things.
And were you aware of that festival going on before the documentaries? Because I knew nothing about it.
Yeah, absolutely aware of it. I was at a time in my life where I was acutely aware of every kind of festival thing that was going on anywhere. And the Fire Festival was one of those things that you look at from the outside and you wonder what the true story is, because no matter what the documentary tells, none of it's actually 100% accurate.
Really?
So, yeah, I mean, I guess that's my perspective on being kind of inside of media and inside of things and seeing like how stories actually start to unfold. And if you go watch the Netflix one and then you go watch the Hulu one, you'll see two different stories told.
Really? Right? I'll watch the Hulu one tonight. For those of you, Ryan, you know what we're talking about?
Yeah, I do.
For those of you who don't, I guess this was, 2 years ago?
Seems like it, in the 2-ish range, yeah.
What did look familiar to me was the orange tiles, the orange squares that they used on Instagram to kind of market.
Yep.
But it was a festival that this company was using to promote the company, correct? It was a company kind of like Uber for celebrities that need agents.
Something like that, yeah. I mean, it was kind of, from my understanding, it was booking music talent on demand, right? So high quality music talent on demand was the Fire app. The Fire Festival, I guess, from the little that I know about it, right, which is like watching it in the news early on when it was happening, seeing social media as it happened, or I guess didn't happen, to the point that it was supposed to, and then seeing the documentaries recently. But it looked like it was just an evolution of an opportunity to make money in a way to, bring a bunch of people together and kind of go after the uber affluent, aspirational, millennial audience that was out there, and say they were going to do this festival on an island with music and parties and boats and models and all this kind of crazy stuff. And I guess it imploded.
It turned into a total disaster.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. That's lack of infrastructure. It looked like. I mean, from the outside looking in, and that happens, right? You get into things too fast, too big, and
yeah, because they were doing it on a private island. It was supposed to be one of Escobar's islands, but then they had to move it, and they had like 10,000 people or whatever it was showing up, and these people started to show up, and there was no place for them to stay.
Yeah.
And it was a total disaster. Ended up canceling it. Blink 182 was supposed to play, and some other rappers.
A whole bunch of big names, and they all just started backing out, and yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about your festival. So what was the name of the company that you were with at that time?
So it was not like Fire, right? I mean, it actually happened, which I guess is a good thing and a major difference. We had some amazingly talented people on the team that thought ahead about things like infrastructure and thought ahead about things like, oh my goodness, if this actually does come through in the first year and we have tens of thousands of people here, where are they going to use the restroom? Where are they going to go and have drinks? And what do we do with trash and all those kind of things?
But, and just to go back, the Fire Festival was kind of a cover for major money laundering or fraud that was going on with the owner of the company, right?
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, again,
because he's in jail now, right?
He is, right. Yeah. So he, obviously had some issues with things that happened there for sure. But watch the Hulu one, because the interesting thing, and get back to festival here that we worked on in the past. The Netflix one really it seems to put a lot of the accountability directly on him. So it's his fault. All these other people that are around him, they were part of it, but it's his thing. Yeah. And then the Hulu one, and then if you go out and just kind of research your own, I mean, man, there was hundreds of people involved, right? So, at what point does accountability solely go to the person that is in jail? Well, obviously, there's a lot of accountability there. But in reality, if you watch the Hulu one, there's this whole other, social media company that was behind this thing, and they knew there was no infrastructure. They knew that things were going to fall apart, but they continued to promote it. So, I don't know. I personally,
what social media company?
I forget the name of the company, but it was in the Netflix documentary one as well. But you kind of look at that and you say, ethically, at what point should you just pull the plug and say, no, I mean, I'm not going to promote the heck out of this, and knowing that this is going to be something that might go wrong, get all these tens of thousands of people there. That just seems like some point you should pull the plug.
People could have died. And
yeah. Yeah. So our festival is called One Spark. Happened in Jacksonville, Florida, for a number of years. Started as an idea. There was a group of us that got together that was kind of just frustrated and tired with the local ecosystem in the community, not really being uber supportive of entrepreneurs or freelancers or artists or musicians. Kind of that creative.
When was this?
Goodness. I want to say 2011-ish was kind of when the groundswell started getting going. 2013, I think, was the first festival, if I'm doing math right. So got organized, and there was another group at the same time that had been kind of pushing things forward. And they were looking at a festival in Michigan, in Grand Rapids, called Art Prize. And Art Prize is the world's largest art competition that's curated, I guess, in essence, right? So there's millions of dollars that go into it, and this huge prize purse, and the crowd gets to vote, and then there's some curation from panels of experts, and you win prizes in different categories.
So it's all based on art.
All based on art, and it's a really, really cool experience. The team up there does a great job. Have been to it a couple times. Great folks. So there's a group in Jacksonville that was working on that kind of concept in the community, and then there was a group of us, myself, a guy named Dennis, a guy named Varick, that were working on cultivating this kind of creative ecosystem in Jacksonville. And at the time, we had this thing downtown in Jacksonville, Florida, and a lot of cities have these things where you've got an art walk every first Wednesday or something like that, right? Yeah. So we went to Art Walk, and we invited people in, and this was a 24-hour cycle, mind you. So we said, hey, on a Tuesday, we put out this video that was just this teaser video of, come get involved and get engaged. And we had no idea at all what we wanted to build, what it was going to be. But the theory was that if you put a message out there, there's going to be a bunch of people that would be attracted to that message. And from that, you could take a bunch of feedback and then craft something and move forward with it. So we put this out, and we had 300 people show up the next day, which in that community and ecosystem was a lot. And we were like, oh my goodness.
And they were just showing up to a First Friday art local.
Well, the art walk was going on, but we had an actual space. At the same time, we were looking at opening up a co-working space in that community. So it was the space that we were looking at, and it was, totally raw, right? Ripped out walls, go in there and you're kind of like, what is this place? I can't see a vision of it yet. And from that art walk, we had a whole bunch of people that showed up that night and said, hey, I want to get involved. And they would ask questions like, what are you guys actually doing with One Spark? And we said, I have no idea. We don't really know yet. We know we want it to be a movement. We know we want it to be something that helps to cultivate, this kind of ecosystem and provide pathways specifically for creatives in this community.
On the entrepreneurial side, correct?
Mostly on the entrepreneurial side, but at the time it was very open and very, very open, meaning, artists, musicians, designers. There's a huge design community in Jacksonville that's really strong, like graphic design, arts, things like that. And so that was kind of the first step. And from there, it turned into, fast forwarding, where we said, okay, there's this other group that's moving forward with this idea of an event. There's a couple folks in Jacksonville that said, hey, what do you guys think about this? And moved forward with saying, well, what if we did a crowdfunding festival? Because at the time, that was when crowdfunding was huge and mainstream, early on in the days of Kickstarter, Indiegogo, those types of things. And for those that don't know what crowdfunding is, right, it's basically just a new term for an old way to raise funds, right? And, a lot of people call it the democratization of capital or things like that. Really, it's just a whole bunch of people that are supporting a cause, an effort, or a new product early on in its life cycle. And for that, they may or may not be getting some sort of reward, right? There's GoFundMe that's out there now, is the biggest crowdfunding platform there is. And it's probably the most personal because anybody can just go raise funds for anything.
Yeah, a lot of nonprofits use it.
Yep.
And, I never made the connection till just now, but I do a little bit of Kickstarter. I watch it and spend a little bit of money on there. And there are a lot of artists on there, especially a lot of musicians. The band The Sword?
I don't.
They're a pretty big rock and roll band. They got exposed on Anthony Bourdain's show when he went to Texas. But Kyle, the guitar player, is doing a solo album, and he raised all of his funds off of Kickstarter. Yeah. And you could get, the more money you donated, you get different stuff, right? So it started out with just a copy of his record, all the way up to a signed copy of his record, all the way up to having him come to your neighborhood and go out for a beer. Yep. So I thought, what a cool way to raise funds. But one, it's a cool way to raise funds. But more importantly, it's a cool way for your fan base to connect with you. To connect, right? Where we've lost that connection with our music because we don't have that physical CD where you get to read through the lyrics and you get to own it. There's this new wave of ways to connect with musicians and on crowdfunding and other social media. So sorry to interrupt.
No. So exactly what you just said was the thesis of doing it in person, right? Yeah. Like online, you get to connect, but almost connect. I mean, if you're in person with somebody and you walk up to them, and if you were raising funds for something, and I said, hey, why are you doing this? And you answered me and you looked me directly in the eye, there's a different human connection than there is online. Sure. And so the theory was, well, let's do a crowdfunding festival in person and then take it offline. And the value of that became huge for a whole bunch of different creators, and fast forward, I mean, this became one of the biggest events ever in Jacksonville. And, the first year we set this huge audacious goal of having 100,000 people show up. And a lot of people called us crazy, and that's okay. It's 8 o'clock, my alarm's going off. One of my current ventures, we got to stand up every morning, so that's just a reminder. Oh, well, you're not going to make it. Not going to make that today. No. So we had this, goal of having 100,000 people out there for this crowdfunding festival, and we started by raising $100K in 30 days on Kickstarter ourselves to seed the funds of it, but most importantly to validate the idea. And that's a lot of what crowdfunding really is you've got this idea, it's a really good way to validate it, to build an initial community and base of followers, of backers, of supporters, of those kind of folks. And then from there, we moved forward, and we were fortunate to connect with a gentleman named Peter Rummel in Jacksonville. Brilliant guy, great guy, wonderful mentor and friend. that believed in doing something big and helped financially back us for a number of years to get it out of the gate. You do a festival that's a week long, and you've got hundreds of thousands of people showing up over the years. I mean, that's a big, heavy thing to do in the market. But yeah, fast forward, and first year, 130,000 or 20,000 people showed up. We had more, or about the same amount of folks ride public transit as when the Super Bowl was in Jacksonville, just to give a perspective as to the size of it. Amazing team of people, and first year I think we had 600 or 700 volunteers. So as an organization, as a nonprofit, you go. I think we originally kind of started full force and hired our first employee in August, and the first year we did the festival, I think it was in April, and so it was just this crazy 6-month period of time to pull everything together.
So when you did your initial Kickstarter, the 30 days, did you hit your goal?
We did. We did. We exceeded it, which you do that and you get into something, you've got a really short period of time. Some of the beauty of those things are you can't overthink, right? You just execute and execute a lot. Yeah. And you get into the space where you're just running full speed.
Well, that's kind of what happened with the Fire Festival, right? Is they were executing this idea, but they almost had the opposite of paralysis by analysis. They needed more analysis to make it happen. So did you guys have people on the team that had experience with festivals?
We did. One of our best hires was a guy named Joe Sampson. Great event background and production, and he ended up, as I transitioned into something else, being the COO and executive director and running it for kind of the second year, and then transitioned out, and I came back in the third year. But I think without the right team and infrastructure, there's no way that this thing would have been pulled off. My role at the time was vision, fundraising, market development, kind of community development, those types of things, and building the team. Once the team got in place, then everybody had individual roles and went from there. We hired great PR folks. We had great social media people. And the amazing thing was the community that just came out of the woodwork and said, look, don't pay me. I just need to help. I want to be involved in this thing because it's something that we've needed in our community for so long. And whatever you need us to do, we'll do. A lot of times with volunteers, you get people that say that, and then, what happened? When you actually ask them to do a real task. I mean, we had real volunteers that were doing real work, 20 hours a week. I mean, that's pretty cool. That's a pretty powerful thing to be part of.
So give me some examples of the type of people that showed up to participate from the entrepreneurial side or the artist side. I mean, do you have any stories of people starting there and kind of taking off?
Yeah, there's oh goodness, it's not fresh in the mind, these days. But one that comes to mind, and I forget if it was second or third year, but and I should share a little bit more about the framework as to how kind of things worked as well, because that'll make sense for how these people kind of launched from one spark, if you will. So,
and how long was the festival?
Each year it changed slightly, but on average it was about 5 days. So, it was a long time, and I think that was one of the biggest complaints from the creators, as we called them, that showed up, was this is just brutal. I mean, this is so much work. But you'd show up, you basically set up, and it was in a massive area, so it was almost 20 square blocks in downtown Jacksonville. Oh, wow. So we basically shut down downtown between Wednesday and Sunday each year of the festival. Local businesses, the majority of them on the feedback that we got, loved it because the foot traffic that would come in. And mind you, I mean, downtown Jacksonville has struggled for a long time, just with an economy, not a lot of foot traffic, a lot of abandoned buildings, those types of things. So it was the byproduct of the festival was a lot of good economic, development type things. But you come in, you apply to get into this thing, you get selected, you get curated and matched directly with a venue, and a venue could be an outdoor space that was managed by the Museum of Contemporary Art or something like that, or it could be inside the walls of some sort of business or venue downtown. So they select who they're going to host, and they get to curate their own space, which is kind of cool. Also kind of a chaotic, nightmarish type thing, as you could imagine, when you've got, hundreds and hundreds of creators that do this stuff. And that evolved over the years into different categories. So music, art, science, technology, those were kind of the main categories that were out there. And people would come and they would present their project just as they would online on Kickstarter, Indiegogo, GoFundMe, things like that. But then they would interact with literally tens of thousands of people over that 5-day period of time and give them their pitch. And the biggest benefit that people would get out of this, some people would go there for funding specifically. And we had a whole nother track and path for entrepreneurs that were looking for seed stage investment or growth capital or things like that they could apply to, and then go meet with real investors from around the country that flew in and did kind of, hate to say it, but it's the easiest picture is like Shark Tank, style pitches, those types of things. And from there, people would either get capital, or they would get customers, or they would get validation, right? And validation could be like, hey, this thing's great, but make it blue instead of green, Or, no, this is a terrible idea. And if you hear that 10,000
because that's
times,
what paralyzes a lot of entrepreneurs from executing ideas, that fear of it not being popular or fear of it being rejected, right?
Yeah.
So that kind of gives people a place to test it, to see.
Exactly the case. And in an environment that's supportive. I mean, everybody knows the purpose of this thing, and you go there as an attendee. And I think half the attendees showed up because they wanted to be part of it, and they wanted to vote, or they wanted to contribute funds to creative projects and those types of things. I think the other half just showed up because there was a whole bunch of people going there, and they were like, "Man, I need to go be part of this."
Because it was open to anybody. Anybody could.
Anybody could attend. And during the first 3 years, there's no fee for it, so just come, open to the public, those types of things. So fast forward to your topic and question about any particular creators that were great or things like that. One that comes to mind was a company called PartPick, and I think PartPick has now raised a ton of money, and it's for the automotive industry. I'm a engineer. I'm somebody. PartPick, yeah, PartPic.
Gotcha.
And they came down from Atlanta. And you can take a picture with your app of some sort of part that's a mechanic, drawing, or like an actual part. It'll tell you what it is, and it'll give you a whole bunch of information about those parts. And they have exploded as a company since then. There's been a number of other companies that have done well. There's been artists that have met people to get new projects, get new works, get new backing, those types of things. There's been musicians that have, gotten picked up. I don't know labels off the top of my head or any of those things at this point, but have heard all of those stories, and still to this day have people that reach out to me directly, and they'll tell me hey, but for OneSpark, right, this wouldn't be happening in my life. And they're all over the world. We did a satellite event in Berlin, Germany. That was a small scale, one-day event that had, I think, 5,000 or 6,000 people that showed up.
Was that called OneSpark as well?
It was called OneSpark, yep. And so that impact has been really, really just cool to be part of and to have seen.
Do you do it in any other cities besides Jacksonville, or just Jacksonville?
Just in Jacksonville is where it happened, yeah, just in Jacksonville.
So this new company you have, the Hairpin Legs. Did that idea start at the OneSpark?
It didn't. No,
it was separate.
It was separate. Yeah, I had transitioned out of OneSpark, and as an entrepreneur cycle goes, I was kind of sitting around on the couch, just depressed. I have no idea what I want to do next.
Was it depressing seeing all these other people come up with ideas and have them go and be successfole?
No, I think personally the depressing thing for me, and probably the first time I shared it, was OneSpark actually had a real huge opportunity to impact people on a global scale. And we had some potential partnerships that would have taken it as such. And at the time, half the board wanted to do it, and the other half the board wanted to keep it local and keep it small. Was not on that same page with that portion of the board, and they asked if I would leave. I'd resign and stay on and serve in a board capacity as one of the founders. And So it's just time to go, So that was really hard.
Because you wanted it to go more global and have it, and they wanted to keep it local.
Yeah, and I mean, the why behind it was to make a big impact. I mean,
Yeah.
it wasn't about making money. It wasn't about any of that. It was to make a big impact and provide pathways.
Well,
for
just
people.
as you were talking about it, I was kind of bummed that we don't have something like that here.
Yeah.
Just with doing this podcast, which we just do for fun and
Right.
for getting to meet people like you and share stories. I mean, how awesome would it be, Ryan, to participate in something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know some people that would do another one, but
Yeah. Well, maybe we could talk about that when we're done. But
yeah.
but yeah, I mean, it's a shame that didn't get more national spread out.
yeah.
Or international.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that part of it, and this was at the end of a 5-year cycle personally. So I was just tired, and came out of that. Had just gotten married, which I think out of that 5 years was the best thing by far. Met my wonderful wife, Sheena, and, had gotten asked to resign like on my birthday. So it was just this weird cycle, and walked out of that meeting and told her, it's like, look, like, I'm going to leave this. I have no idea what's coming up next, for income or anything like that, but have been through this cycle before. You haven't with me yet, but, we'll figure it out. And she's like, okay, I don't know what that means yet, but
Yeah.
okay. And also gave her a heads up that, probably going to be just kind of, as I call it, like in the basement for a little while, or just trying to sort out myself and take some time and those types of things. So did that. The person that I'm working with DIY Hairpin Legs on now, Matt, was actually a pastor in his previous life, and he was the guy that married us and a really good friend. So, I started going and volunteering at his church because my wife was like, you need to get out of the house. Like,
Yeah.
you need to go do something. And I knew she was right, but didn't want to. And so started doing that. And then one day he's like, hey, what do you think about hairpin legs? I was like, what the heck is a hairpin leg? Like, I don't even know what that is. At the time, I had been working with a group of people in Chicago and Seattle, at this new venture studio called Proto Ventures. And this guy, Will, had come up with this framework and put it out there on something called Startup Rocket. But basically a process by which to ideate, validate, kind of define, grow what a startup might be. And I told Matt, I said, look, man, like, I don't know anything about hairpin legs or wire forming or metal goods. I've always been fascinated with furniture and design and that kind of thing. But if you're willing for me to vet this framework at the same time as we're trying to figure out this, project, at the time called a project, now it's a company, then like happy to get involved. So we did. We went through this process and validated everything. And the first day we put up, I think, probably the worst website I have ever not just been part of, but like seen. Right? It just had this little landing page and said like
For hairpin legs?
For hairpin legs, right? And we were like, what do you want to call it? Like DIY hairpin legs, because that's what it is. We had all these
Because
people.
the website looks awesome. Pull it back up there, Ryan.
It's a little better now than it was that first day, but it literally just had a form that said, like, if you want to buy hairpin legs, submit your email address. And we went out and did some Google ads, and the next day we had 10 email addresses, and we both called each other and went, hey, do you know any of these people? I'm like, no. Do you know any of these people?
Wow.
No. So, yeah, fast forward, and we got serious about it a few months later, and started the company with a $65 Harbor Freight manual bender. And I'm taking that. That's Matt's line, because he's the one that actually started bending the legs.
So
by
you had
hand.
orders before you had product.
We did, and then we figured out how to make them, and kind of went
Wow.
forward from there.
If you build it, they will come.
Sometimes, yeah.
Well, I want to dive more into this hairpin legs, but I want to go back to something you said. You
Sure.
talked about a 5-year cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And coming out of One Spark, this wasn't the first time you've been through that 5-year cycle.
Yeah.
Do you think that the time frame, that 5-year cycle, is something that that applies to everybody, or do you think it's just 5 years to you? Because I feel like I've been through cycles too, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't recognize when they're in a cycle.
Yeah. That's an interesting question. I know for me it's pretty close to that, and whether or not that's intentional or a byproduct of how I run, or what it is, I'm not 100% sure yet. I think this cycle. I'm learning that probably more and embracing it more, and I've got way more awareness of it, and intentionality around different things with it. But I've seen people go through 3-year cycles. I've seen people go through 7. I think everybody's probably a little bit different based on what they're doing and what their life circumstances.
Let me interrupt you, because I think you said something pretty profound there, and that comes with experience, right? Is the understanding your inner cycle and being more intentional with your decisions instead of acting less emotional and more intentional.
Yeah.
And I think you see that a lot with older people in their careers that are on their second or third venture, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Entrepreneur, and I know a lot of entrepreneurs and have talked literally with thousands of them over the years, and there's some people that struggle with the cycle of kind of being depressed at the end of a venture, and there's some people that don't as much. And I say as much because even the folks that say like, no, like I have never really battled with any of that stuff. When you start talking to them and you ask them how they're doing and you talk to them about what's next, there's just a different level that they're at that's not the same as they were, at the peak time of things going right or being, or even things going wrong, but them actually being in it, so to speak. And so I think one thing that I've definitely recognized for myself, and I've seen with a lot of others, is the need for a time to reset. And this time and this cycle, it was very intentional to say, I'm going to get involved in something that's not very public. I'm going to get involved in something that is within my realm of quasi-control. So, our current company, we've got a wonderful, great small investor, and we have, no real other board structure than Matt and I, and that's worked for the time being. I think fast forward, ready again to start to scale, but have been just really fortunate to take a year and a half traveling the country on the road with my wife and moving up to Seattle from Florida. We thought it was going to take a little bit of time, and man, it's taken a lot longer, but that has been very intentional this time of saying,
instead of just jumping into another project.
Instead of just jumping in. And even people asking and saying, hey, I'd love to get involved in this, things that normally would be super exciting for me and are in my wheelhouse, I've said no.
And is it because it wasn't exciting to you anymore, or is it because you were intentionally just trying to take that break?
Just intentionally saying no. And things that are exciting and would be, and during the moment are, really of interest. And amazing amounts of, cash at the time where we're kind of not doing as well as we were before, and that's okay right now because it's a reboot time.
So is it a struggle to not fill that void with another project? Because it seems like if you've had success as an entrepreneur and you're moving on to another project, it almost seems like you'd want to fill that void right away to avoid that depression of having nothing, right?
Yeah, and I think I did fill it, but with different things that were new priorities, right? So for me, like I've got a very clear priority schedule as to what's important to me right now. I mean, my faith is number one to me. My marriage is second to that. My kind of family and friend structure is next to that, and what's going on in life. And part of that is also just personal well-being. And then after that, it comes, ventures and entrepreneurship and those types of things. And I think that's always been there, but it hasn't been as strong. Yeah.
Or define. I mean,
I
when
think
did you
it's always
define that?
been-
Because you said faith, and then your wife, and then family, and
Yep.
then ventures. When did you set that priority? Was that after?
I think
One
that's
Spark?
been there probably before One Spark. I think that's probably been there maybe a dozen years or so, right? I mean, that's been there, but it hasn't been as strong where I'm at a point where I'm not willing to bend those things anymore. And I found actually that I perform better when I keep them in line.
And you talked earlier about having some mentors. Right now in the entrepreneurial and sales and that kind of field,
Sure.
coaching's like the hot thing right now,
Yeah.
right? Everyone's getting coaches or have done coaching or becoming a coach. So did you lean on those mentors to kind of help you come up with that priority?
I I think I would say that those mentors and advisors and even just pure peer friends probably gave me more confidence and courage to accept it, right? And there's a difference between knowing it and accepting it inherently as to like, this is my code. And I think, and you know, talk about that with sales and coaching, and that's a big hot thing. I think there's a lot of stuff, even just with, you know, that talks about male and female and what's hot right now and gender and all these different things that are out there. I think men used to have a real strong code of ethics or code of arms, right? If you go way back into history. And I think there's been some loss of that and degradation of it over time. So, I mean, personally, over the past year and a half, have read a bunch of different things, have watched a bunch of different things, have allowed myself to just go and explore on the internet on days where, you know, I've got extra time, where in the past I wouldn't do that. And I think some of that has just helped to say, like, no, this is me as a person, and I'm okay with who I am. And coming out of the cycle of OneSpark, I mean, this is the first time, and there's big explosions in the media when, you know, things started changing and that kind of stuff. So it was the first time I had ever experienced that. And didn't really have, I think, the right group around me at the time to be able to go through it in a different manner, I'll say. Not necessarily a better one, but just a different one. As you learn things and you experience them, you approach them differently, right? That's how life goes. But I think about it now, and I was talking with my wife about this actually a couple of weeks ago. The ability to say what was actually in my heart and on my mind wasn't there as it is now. And so I think that has changed definitively during this past year and a half of being on the road and traveling and doing, you know, different ventures and work and that kind of stuff.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that you kind of filtered yourself a little bit when you were in that role? Was it a confidence? I mean, because I've struggled with that too.
Yeah, I think there was a couple different things. One, it was new. So lack of experience in those situations and settings breeds inability to execute well in the moment and stay with what you know to be true. I think the other piece of it was something that grew so fast and so big just kind of goes, oh, well, okay, this must be the right thing to do because other people have done it like this before. When in reality, it may not be the right thing to do, you know? So funny thing and kind of makes this point, but on the way here this morning, you know, I'm listening to music and I realized it was the first time in a really long time that I was excited not to have talking points. Right?
Yeah.
Like it was great to actually just go sit down and be like, hey, let's just talk and be okay and open with everything. And that's how OneSpark started. And that's how a lot of the early ventures that I got involved in that were very public started, was just going and not having talking points. And at some point in time, things changed with that, right? And people said, well, this is what's important to say because otherwise there's fear of loss.
Do you think that's inevitable with any big project like that you get to that point where it does become a polarized thing of opinions, and if you're going to be on the board, you kind of have to be like-minded? Do you think that's organically that's always going to happen?
I hope not, because I don't want that same cycle to move forward with what we're doing now, and I'm pretty committed to trying to make sure that doesn't happen, you know. And I don't think it is, because I've seen other companies and other boards and other ventures that are structured differently, and you have to make some hard decisions, right? Like this is a total left turn here for a second, but I think it might be of interest, so let's go with it.
Sure.
I talk about like going into, you know, the web and just watching things. My wife got me for our first anniversary. I guess you're supposed to get paper, right?
Yeah.
So she got me this little bonsai tree kit.
Okay.
And I haven't used it yet, but I'm really fascinated about the whole art of like bonsai trees.
Yeah.
And
all I know is Karate Kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you know about Karate Kid?
About the bonsai trees.
Just the bonsai trees,
Yeah.
right?
You remember he used to, that was
Just
part of the
trip,
training.
trip, trip. Yeah,
it was
yeah.
just trimming those bonsai trees.
So The other morning, I was just really distracted, and I couldn't get focused on work. We're moving this week. We've got a lot going on personally and professionally. It's just a strange time. I just could not get focused. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to let myself go for a little bit, and I'm just going to like watch videos about these guys doing bonsai trees.
Mm-hmm.
And I was watching this video about this bonsai master, and he says this thing. He's like, you'll never have a beautiful bonsai unless you are cutting the limbs. And I kept going and going and going and watching, and that statement has stuck with me. But
Sure.
everything about this art of like training these little trees, and apparently you can make bonsai trees out of almost any tree if you spend the time on it, has really stuck with me about like how to cultivate businesses and how to move forward with just all sorts of aspects of life, right? I mean, at some point in time, if there's things that are detracting you, you cut them. Mm-hmm. And some of those things may be really, really painful to do or really hard to do.
Well, I think the most common one's relationships, right?
Sure.
Cutting those relationships out, which is tough.
Yeah. And all sorts of relationships, right? I mean,
Yeah.
some of those are business, some of those are personal, some of those are customer relationships, some of those may be board member relationships, to get back to that topic. I mean, there's all sorts of different things with it.
And maybe that's one of the reasons coaching's so popular right now is because it's hard to have the confidence to make those decisions. I mean, those are bold decisions.
Yeah.
And the repercussions of those decisions can be really great. So having somebody just like getting validation from going to a festival with an idea, getting validation
Sure.
from a coach on, hey, I'm thinking about cutting this customer relationship out, or I'm thinking about hiring or letting this person go, and getting validation from somebody that's a supposed expert.
Yeah. And, you'd asked timing-wise, and was it a courage thing at the time, or a confidence thing at the
Yeah.
time? And I actually, and maybe that's why I said courage first. I think it was a courage thing, right? Like, had the confidence, knew what was right to do, but I think it was a courage thing. And for me, the strength and faith provides that, because in a way, not in a way, but the truth for me is like, it doesn't really matter what a lot of other people think, as long as I'm doing what's first in my priority list. And and that's trying to love people well. And as a CEO of companies, it's the most lonely job there is. And a lot of people talk about that, and I don't care if anybody says there's something else that's more lonely. I mean, being a CEO is a lonely gig. You've got a board that you've got to go and sometimes impress, sometimes persuade, sometimes battle. You've got nobody else that's directly at your peer level. And at the end of the day, if you're a founder and CEO, you have to make the decision. Like, you have to make the hard call. And the board's not going to do it, right? They're going to give you feedback on it. Your team's not going to do it. They're going to give you feedback on it. But I think over the past year and a half, solidifying my faith relationship with God and saying, okay, like, I'm here to be a CEO of companies. Like, that's what I was put here to do.
So do you think that kind of what you're describing is really similar to a company's core values, right? You have your list of
Sure.
priorities. You kind of see that as a way to test decisions. Does this decision match my core values?
As a company's core values?
No, as personal. Like,
As-
your priorities of faith, why family, immediate family.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's my personal framework or matrix to vet things through, right? Which in a way makes decisions a lot easier, and you don't have the same weight that you might otherwise have going to sleep at night or waking up in the morning. Now, mind you still have weight, but it's not a weight of indecisive regret potentially, right? And I say potentially because regret comes for people, and that's a big word that a lot of people use and like and don't like for
Yeah.
a variety of different reasons. But yeah, I think absolutely that is a framework by which I pass most all big decisions through these days.
Well, the regret's inevitable if you're responsible for making that many decisions, right? Because you can't have the success you've talked about without having some form of failure.
Right.
And that's really when our experience of meeting people in the show is one common theme has been, don't ask me about my successes, ask me about my failures. There's more to learn there. And so you have to come to terms with, I would assume, with having that regret, because you're going to make the wrong decisions, right?
Yeah, and whether or not you choose to actually have it as a regret, right? I think I look at all these things now as like I'm just really genuinely thankful for having the experience of it. And so there's some decisions that, you know, where I am now, I would have made differently in the past. But I don't necessarily, I say necessarily, I don't regret them. Like, I don't regret that time. I'm actually really thankful for it because of the fact that it's fast forwarded me, you know, however many years of experience in a short period of time.
Absolutely. Well, just back to my point earlier that a lot of the stuff you're talking about is stuff that comes with years of experience, you know, guys that are a lot further along in their careers.
Yeah.
Well, I think all that's really good. What do you think, Ryan?
I think it goes along with who is the author of Miracle Morning.
Hal Elrod.
Yeah, so you know his kind of thing is his slogan is "Can't change it," and so when you're talking about, you know, whether it's regrets, and I really like the way you put it, you're like, I don't necessarily see something as a regret. It was an experience, whether good or bad or whatever, but any experience. What you're going to pull away from that is you know, just how you view it, and whether it was good or bad, it's I can't change it, but what am I going to do to move forward now? So,
Well, and I like what you said too about having a concrete definition of your personal values. I don't remember exactly how you put it, but we had Patrick Palmer on a couple episodes ago, and we talked in length about company core values and what they mean, and how it's a way to test decisions a company's going to make or a decision an employee makes. Does it match the company's core values? Even our office, we came up with what we call our code, and it's something that we can pass everything you do throughout the day. You can pass through. So it's communication, ownership, discipline, and excellence. But you're making me think about staying true to yourself and having your own core values and having it prioritized, right? And everyone kind of that we talked about that with people before and with coaches and stuff, having your own set. But I think having that well defined and sticking to it, you know. And I think, you know, for example, Ryan does a really good job of prioritizing his family and work life, and he has kind of a line he doesn't cross.
Yeah.
And I've always respected that, and I think I know what mine are, but I don't think I've always stick to those.
Yeah.
I think even with this podcast, I mean, we've had lots of discussions based on, you know, do we stay in the museum?
Yeah.
You know, sometimes these animals can be polarizing to some people. Like,
Sure.
do we take it to an off-site location with a gray background?
Right.
You know, when kind of the title of our podcast started out of a play on words, like the hunt for success, when it's not a hunting podcast.
Yeah. I mean, animal conservation is something that's really important to Ryan and I, and that's what this museum's all about, and to have the opportunity to film it here. You know, maybe we look at it as a challenge to kind of talk about what animal conservation is, but we just wanted to be ourselves. We wanted a format where we can come talk about things we enjoy, which is entrepreneurship, success, and then hunting and fishing as well. But
and that stuff's not always easy, right? I mean, especially over the past decade. I mean, I'm a big fan of history. I'm not a huge wealth of knowledge of it yet, right? I think that's a lifetime of learning to even dabble into what real history is. But where we're at today, and even looking back historically, like, leadership is really hard, and being true to yourself is really difficult. And those are easy words to say, but the reason for it is because if you're not successful, then you're pointed at as a failure. If you are successful, then you're pointed at to be torn down with your flaws, right? So either way, like, it's hard.
Double-edged sword.
Yeah, it just is. And so keeping some sort of code for me personally has been like, okay, well, at least I know who I am, because it's going to be hard in this world of leadership and putting yourself out there for things. And I think part of the lesson of going through these battles, you know, in public media's eyes and stuff like that, and I mean, literally, and you know, not a lot of people know it. My close circle does, and now whoever watches this kind of will. But you know, there's times where we're going through battles with the PR team of a billionaire, and you know, I wake up at 3 a.m. with phone calls from local news media saying, hey, like they literally just sent this release over and they timed it so it'll hit the morning news. I wanted to give you a heads up about it to see if you get a response. And I get this at 2, 3 in the morning. You just in tears, literally, you know, laying there like, why is this happening? But man, what an experience, right? Like, okay, so that happened to me in life, and moving forward now, it's like, yeah, that's probably going to happen again if I continue to try to do things that are pushing the boundary and being a leader.
Well, you know, you talked about kind of a in the entrepreneur and arts and everything, in this revolution that we're going through with technology, that there's a lot of opportunities, and a lot of times there is talking points, and it kind of becomes polarized, right?
Yeah.
I almost feel that with the ability to have anyone who wants to get their opinion heard or start something like a podcast or some art form on their social media, even down just to their Facebook page, everyone has the opportunity. And it seems like, at least I hope, that the support for free thought and freedom of speech and opinion is more supported, and it's less polarizing, unless you have to go by these talking points if you're going to get any pickup, right? And if you don't go against those, your ideas can be squashed. And I'm starting to see, maybe it's just because people are getting sick of the political climate and the division in our country, but I'm starting to see more of that support of wanting to give everyone a platform to talk and everyone a platform to opinion, and not let someone's opinion squash the rest of what they have to offer.
Yeah.
Do you see that, or do you think that's not happening?
I don't know, and I want to ask you to expand on that a little bit more. But I think that there are more pathways for people's voices to be heard. So I agree with that, and I think that there's also a lot more noise, right?
A lot more noise.
because of the fact that there's more pathways. I also know that there are still, right, the leading voices, and voices could be media outlets, could be influencers as we define them today in social media, could be folks with deep pockets that are behind the scenes, that if they want an opinion to be out there publicly, then there's ways to make that so, right? Because you can do things bigger, faster, stronger with more resources.
Well, I think that's why the censorship with things like Twitter and YouTube and Instagram are so important to keep those things sacred. Because let's take Fox News as an example, and Murdoch, right? You have Sean Hannity, who's all opinion, and he gets, I don't know, 4 or 5 million views per episode. Then you have someone like Joe Rogan, who runs a very small budget, very small podcast that he streams for free on YouTube that gets 9 million views.
Sure.
So you have somebody that isn't backed by a billionaire who can capture more views than somebody on a national news channel.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's awesome.
It is. And so to that piece of it, I agree, holistically support it. I mean, like we've been talking about One Spark, that's what it was built from, right? Like it was a groundswell movement of people that said like, hey, I want to go do something.
And for the first time in civilization, pretty much everybody can do it. It just takes a microphone, it takes a phone, and you could be streaming to an audience that's endless.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, a tremendous amount of dedication and time and effort and pursuit and, you know, a little bit of talent probably at some point. But so that's why it's like dive into that more, because sure, all the tools are there. But there's only one guy named Joe Rogan that's doing what he's doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's lots though. I mean,
at that level.
Yeah, at 9 million views.
Right.
You're right. But I think you're starting to see more and more podcasts, because we've been doing this 2 years. And when we started, there were a lot of podcasts. Now it seems like everybody's doing podcasts.
Right.
So I guess you can get lost, but at least there's all those voices that have a platform now.
Yeah. Yeah, and the fun thing about it is, like Matt and I, with our current companies, we was talking about, it's like, maybe we should start a podcast. And it's like, maybe we should just go on a bunch of them.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's a whole bunch of different ones that are out there and other people that have already provided this platform. So there's also now different ways to kind of use these things, for whatever purpose or reason.
Well, and they're in the news right now. They're talking about Elon Musk having to step down, right?
Right.
But even companies like Tesla, seeing a CEO that kind of is like giving the middle finger to a lot of people, saying, "I'm going to run my company the way I want to. I'm going to go on Joe Rogan and drag off a joint, and I don't really care what everyone else thinks." And it's getting to the point now where he's exploited that to the point where everyone's saying, "You got to get a CEO that's not going to go in there and goof around." But in a way, he's inspired a lot of people to like, look, go be an entrepreneur. And you don't have to have your ideas in this box, right?
Yeah.
In kind of an extreme way.
Right. Yeah. What's your take on that? I'm curious.
On Elon Musk having to step down?
Yeah. Just in the being a controversial leader of a big company these days.
But it's really similar to Steve Jobs, right? And I'm not smart enough. I don't have an MBA or anything like that to understand, does a company need a CEO that really knows how to run a company? And does somebody like Elon Musk just need to be the vision, the idea part? But I don't think you can argue with what he's done and the people that he's inspired. And he's going to go down being one of the great CEOs or great entrepreneur minds of our generation.
Yeah.
Right? You have Steve Jobs, and the next is going to be Elon Musk.
Right.
So whether you agree or disagree with the way he's running this company, and only time's going to tell, right? I mean, the stock's hurting. They've had to make some pretty big decisions. They closed down their retail. They're going online only. The cars dropped in price. Now they're going up in price. But he's the first CEO since Tucker that's taken on the big three, right?
Yep.
So, and he's actually having success with it. So I think there's a lot to learn there without necessarily having an opinion if he should be CEO or not. I think there's a lot to dive into just of way he's doing it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, it kind of goes into big vision leadership, right? And everybody, so early on, there's a whole bunch of fanboys, a whole bunch of fans of anything that's new and different. And I wouldn't say that I know enough about it yet, but I've seen the pattern develop. And one thing that I've noticed about myself is like I'm a pattern person, right? I'll recognize patterns and I'll identify them a little bit earlier than some others, and then kind of move forward and go like, oh, this is how you figure it out. But in that kind of realm of startups, and this has happened with a lot of companies, right? Happened with Uber and Travis. It's happening with Elon now. It's happened with Facebook and Mark, and I mean it happens with all these kind of folks where you've got a big vision of something, and early on everybody's really supportive because it's disruptive and it's new, and it's like, oh, that's amazing, and that's what happened in tech, right? Tech became sexy, and so everybody had this like, oh, I want to get into tech, and I say that and I kind of chuckle because now we're doing like these wire form metal goods, and that's not sexy at all, but it actually is because it makes your home really cool looking.
Well, and there is this big thing going on with artisans right now, right?
Yeah,
that's kind of popular.
The maker craft and all that, but all of these kind of big visionary folks, you've got this huge supportive base early on, and then there's some point where it starts to tip. And it starts to tip usually around massive, hard strategic decisions that if they work, well, half the people may get alienated for some reason because the early populace starts to put their own like connection into something, right? So the people that backed Tesla early on, what did they back it for? Well, probably a bunch of different things. One, like they loved the fact that they came out with a Roadster and it was a high-end car, and like I don't care how much it costs, I'm going to do that. And then on the other end of that same spectrum, you've got people that are backing it because it's hugely green and it's an electric vehicle. Now, those two people are probably fairly different in the way that they go about their lives, right?
I never thought about it that way.
But it's a massive like population, and so you attract this huge audience. And then as you go through each of these stages of development of any sort of new project or vision or leadership, like all of a sudden you start to alienate groups. And some of those groups not only become detractors, but they actively go after tearing you down. And so, like, I think that part, if there's anything that I think is a natural course or cycle that's going to happen, I think that is a big piece of it.
You know, I never thought about it that way, but I think that's even true on small scales within, like, even within. Yeah.
How about a band? You got your early, you know, like I heard them when they
Right.
played in my park.
Right.
And then, you know, and then all of a sudden they're playing in a stadium and you're like,
They
oh
sold
man,
out.
they totally sold out.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that course is something I'm really fascinated with right now, because I wonder if there are things that companies or people with projects, or, you know, anybody with any new idea that they're bringing to fruition can learn about it. Make this decision. We know this is what's going to happen, and are there different ways to communicate that? Not better, but just you know, maybe more transparently, right? And I think that's a big piece of the puzzle in being able to navigate those rough seas. Is
Well, I think you're
just
seeing
being-
it with almost every industry right
Sure.
now, because the the biggest thing that's going to force people to make big decisions, either small entrepreneurs, people in sales, or CEOs of large companies, is you got AI, robots, and blockchain, right? And you have companies like Amazon, and Amazon, Zillow, Uber. I mean, you have these major companies that are changing the playing field completely. So how are you going to compete with that? And those decisions you're going to make, I'm sure half the people are going to agree and disagree with those
Yep.
big decisions, right?
Yep.
We're taking our business, which is mortgages, we're taking it in a little old school, back to basics, hit the streets, networking, providing something that those bigger companies aren't going to be able to provide. But those are very intentional decisions we have to make, and we get different reactions.
Yep.
So I think it's affecting everybody, you know. And look at all the challenges that we're faced, and I'm sure very similar conversations were made during the Industrial Revolution, right? And it's
Sure.
happening all over again, and it's exciting as hell.
Yeah. I think overall it's a pretty unique time. I spent a bunch of time back in the day with a company called Interline Brands that eventually sold to Home Depot, and one of the just wild projects that I was fortunate to work on at the time, and I came in to do special projects, was to look at the housing market, and this was just pre-collapse. And so our team got to work with some brilliant minds at the Joint Center for Housing Studies at Harvard, and all sorts of folks that were on the bleeding edge of, you know, predictions at the time. And I think it was luck along with some great experience and some brilliant minds, but, you know, predicted what was about to happen about 6 to 8 months out, and started making some recommendations and changes to the C-suite at our company and those types of things, and helped weather the storm a little bit better.
Wow.
But I think about that now, and a friend of mine, actually business partner Matt, he's going through this process of, you know, potentially listing house, and some other people are looking at that. And you hear about this company called Open Door.
Yes.
So, you know, we're on our stand up the other morning, and he goes, so my house is under contract, and I haven't met with anybody. It's pretty close to what I would think it would be for the market price. And all I got to do is come out and do an inspection, right? What does that do to that type of an industry? You know, with transformative change, it's pretty wild to see.
You know Darren Hardy.
I don't.
He used to be the publisher of Success Magazine.
Okay.
And he does a lot of seminars and classes.
I'm terrible with names. It's one of those things if I saw I
too.
might, but yeah.
And he was talking about it in one of the seminars we saw him at. And he was talking about the technological revolution that we're going through now, and comparing it to the Industrial Revolution. And he painted two pictures. And one was a dad 30, 40 years from now with his grandson on his knee saying, I was there. I was there during the revolution, and I took action.
Wow.
And I started this company. And all we have right now is because I did that, because I was there. And the second grandfather, with his son on his knee, said, I was there, and I didn't take action.
Yeah.
And all that we don't have is because I didn't take action. And he was saying that this is one of those times in history where the opportunity is there.
Isn't that any time, though?
Well,
I mean, I know there's some massive parallels between like the Industrial Revolution and kind of tech, right? We'll just call it that for now. And there are some massive similarities between the ability to do things in the Industrial Revolution that couldn't have been done because of machinery, equipment, capital stuff, like, you know, that thing.
Yeah.
And then now because of access to information flow and the speed at which it can transport and deliver and app development, those types of things, and devices. And but in a way, like, you could also take that back to agricultural times.
Mm-hmm.
You could also take it back to prehistoric times. I mean, if you're a caveman sitting there, I mean,
I think it's unprecedented,
always.
though. I mean, I just finished season 2 of Westworld last night, and it really makes you think of where are we going to be in 50 years?
Sure.
And I don't think you can compare the scale of change that's going to happen.
Scale or speed? Or
I
are
think
you saying
both. I think both. I mean, you can name almost any industry right now, and they're being impacted like never before because of all these changes with AI and
Sure.
robots and blockchain
Yep.
and everything we're talking about. So we'll see.
Yeah.
But it's a great time. It's a great time to have festivals like that. That One Spark. I loved hearing that story.
Yeah, it was fun to be part of it, and it's fun to move forward from it in a way too, though. To be honest, I mean, there's a lot of, you talk about opportunity. I'm really excited right now to get into the community in Seattle and plug in. And with our company we're looking at right now, we're going through some of those framework decisions of like, do we want to take on a huge round of capital and scale rapidly? And we've got some folks that are very interested in doing that. We think there's a huge opportunity in the marketplace, not to go into too much, but people want to make their own things. And a lot of our customers are really like struggling with finding component parts for furniture to actually make different things. And, the number one thing people find easy to make is a table, right? You just need legs and a top. You can do the same kind of things with chairs. You can do that with desks. You can do that with a bunch of different furniture pieces. And the maker, revolution, we'll call it, seems to have kind of grown, but also stalled and capped. So it's getting bigger, but it's not as timely in the media, maybe as it was a few years ago with different things. But we still get requests from people all the time that are like, hey, do you know where I can find X? Like, I would love to make a couch, but I can't figure out how to do that. I'd love to be able to do different types of shelving, but I can't figure out how to do that.
See, I've noticed that too, and I think that's the way retail is going to get saved, right? These mom and pop shops are going to get saved.
Yeah.
And it's the people that are realizing that there's a shift going on. Sears just went out of business. Are you kidding me?
Isn't that crazy?
But I'm going to get a little nerdy here for a second. I tie flies for fishing.
Okay, yeah.
And I've gotten really into it recently. My daughter's starting to get into it, so it's become this popular hobby we do all the time.
Yeah.
But you can't find certain things on Amazon, right?
I thought you could find everything on Amazon.
You can't.
You can buy a tiny house on Amazon today.
I know, but you can't. You can't find certain marabous and certain feathers on Amazon, or certain hooks, or it's a limited supply. And my fly shop's out of business. The local fly shop in Vancouver's out of business. The closest fly shop I got to go into downtown Portland. So I think there's going to be an increasing need for being able to go and find that expert that has everything in that specific artisan, right? Even my daughter and I decided we were going to make lemon meringue pie the other day. So I needed to go buy pie pans, right?
Yeah.
And I needed them then. And I know Amazon's getting to the point where a drone will deliver pie pans to my front door.
Right. That's kind of like the quote of the day, though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, a drone will deliver pie pans to the front of my door within an hour.
And maybe that'll kill this, but so I went to Bed Bath and Beyond.
Yeah.
And it was closed, like out of business. And so then I went to our local Fred Meyer's, and all I could find are these little tiny pie pans. So we made a bunch of tiny lemon meringue pies. And then my wife gets home and I'm like, yeah, I went to Bed Bath & Beyond. They're out of business. And she goes, that store's been out of business for 2 years. And so we're losing that ability to be able to go to a store and get something very specific that we need. So I ordered on Amazon. It showed up 2 days later. And then the following weekend, we made a normal size pie. But kind of, and I'm not trying to get away from your point because I think it's really valid.
You should have gone to Home Goods.
Yeah. What's a Home Goods?
Like in Jansen Beach, Home Goods, all kinds of home.
Is that like linens and things?
It's like a Ross Dress for less, but for Home Goods.
Yeah, that's a good description of it. Yeah.
But I hope we see a resurgence of retail for very specific things like the mom and pop shops, right?
Yeah. It's, I don't know. We have this conversation about retail right now in real time, probably on a weekly basis, with our team and network. And I've been asking a lot of people like their theories and thoughts on it. The mattress industry is a good example of like the evolution of retail right now. And Mattress Firm was like, if I need a mattress, I go there, I get a mattress. Like it's done. I know where to go, right? And now you've got all of these consumer brands that are D2C, direct to consumer, like sending you a mattress in a box, Casper, Purple, Tuft & Needle, all those folks, and know some people that have worked at those companies, and their evolution was direct-to-consumer first, and then they couldn't grab the rest of the market. And so now they're trying to figure out how to get the rest of the market by having a retail experience, right? So it's not a retail store per se, but it's kind of like, Delta Sky Lounge that you go into and you've got an experience with the product. We've got a bit of a theory that in the furniture space especially, people want to touch things, right? Like you want to touch it, you want to feel it. AR and VR is going to get pretty far to that, but man, that's still a little ways out before you can put something on your hands and actually feel it. Now, I mean, the technology's there, but the distribution of that technology is still years to come, where it's a consumer in the home type item. So our theory in that retail sector for furniture and home goods at least is that there's probably some potential to create a retail experience by which people could go in and fast forward to this in a second, but there's a really cool furniture or cool grocery store I went to that helped give us this concept in Berlin. But you could go into this furniture store and look around and you can kind of pick out your own componentry. And man, if you wanted the experience right next door to you of actually sawing wood and having some sort of finishing stations and those types of things, like a lot of people don't get that, right? And it's so off-putting because you see it on YouTube and you're like, I don't even have a circular saw. Like, I can't do that. Or, oh, man, I don't know where to find these things. It's all education. And so if you think about, like, where we're at now, yes, you got access to education, but it's online and it's through YouTube and it's through some sort of other tutorial, and you don't have somebody that grabs your hand physically.
They've used it
helps.
to replace that
Right.
instead of enhancing it.
But it can't replace it,
No.
right? So I think there's a gap there in that retail space. That's something that we're looking at very specifically. And mentioned, I share this idea. There's a grocery store, and my wife's been in the grocery business for forever, and she loved it. We went to in Berlin. And you walk in, and they've got a weekly selection of farm goods that come in, and then they've got recipes on the menu. And so it's kind of like HelloFresh and all that stuff that shows up at your door, but you actually went into the store and got your own product. So it was a different type of experience that is way more hands-on and has way more meaning to it.
There's something that is a lot of fun by being on a first-name basis with your butcher.
Yep.
Right? Being able to go into a fly shop and actually talk to an expert that
Right.
can show you the different materials or show you different fly rods. You can actually go out and cast them. Or if you want to go buy a stereo, being able to go and see your buddy Matt at the stereo store to help you build it and help you listen to it. But it seems like you kind of have to have both. And one person that comes to mind is Joe Roeder, who's been on the podcast twice. And he is the head guide at the Reds Fly Shop in Yakima. So
Nice.
they have a big lodge there, and he's become kind of a celebrity on the internet, on YouTube, because of all the videos he does. And he made a decision 8 years ago to really embrace video and give a lot of education on fly fishing.
Yeah.
You can learn to fly fish from A to Z just by watching his videos. But you can also go to his fly shop, meet him, go on a guided fishing trip with the guy.
Right.
And so they provide both. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
And so I hope you're right. I hope that's coming back, because it'll be nice when I can go back down the street to my local fly shop or go to a furniture store and actually talk to somebody that knows what they're doing.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know how. I don't think it'll ever come back to the point where global economics was dominated by small business purely, right? I don't think we'll see that again, at least in my lifetime. I mean, it may happen where there's something that we can't foresee in the future, but I think that's gone. And I think it's gone just because the allocation of resources and the ability to do something on a big scale, you've got to have a tremendous amount of resources to do it, right? I think the local experience probably stays, but it's not as prevalent. So it's not in all the small towns or small cities, right? There's the one that made it in Portland, or there's the one that made it in a different city. You talk about fly fishing. I'd love to learn how to fly ties, so you got to teach me sometime.
Sure. I'll teach you how to tie flies as well.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I do that all the time. I'm going to go fly some ties.
We got this little Tenkara rod, and
Yeah.
we were in a town just outside of Ouray, Colorado. But we went in and had that experience, right? We walked in, talked to the guy. We were like, look, we don't know much about this at all, but we know that there's different flies you get in different seasons and different places, so teach us. And we probably spent an hour in there, and it was like the best part of the afternoon. And then we went, and then you get the local knowledge about where to go, which you don't get through the YouTube tutorial experience. So there's that little 20% gap, that you still miss.
Yeah.
And we went out, and he gave us some trails to go to. We fished some beaver dams, and we had just a wonderful afternoon and evening in this beautiful setting that, but for going in and actually talking with somebody in person, we wouldn't have that memory or that experience, right? We probably could have found the place. We probably could have still got some flies and had a good time and done all that, but that was the foundation that started it. So I don't know. I'm bullish on the furniture sector, obviously, in retail, and I think that there's a lot of opportunity there to have a more meaningful human experience, especially with the things that are in your home.
So I want to summarize just a little bit, kind of a theme that we've been talking about on this episode is cycles, right? And just like a farmer burns his crops, right? They'll do the intentional burning so that the crops come back stronger. It kind of feels like what we're talking about right now is that similar cycle. We had the housing collapse, the Great Recession.
Yep.
And out of that came a lot of entrepreneurs that maybe got killed in the investment portion of it, or they lost their job, or they were at Home Depot, and the Home Depot had to lay people off. And so they went out and started companies like Uber. And probably a lot of the people that attended that festival in 2013 were probably entrepreneurs that had that 9-to-5 job that went away.
There were.
And we're seeing that cycle again with this revolution of mom and pop stores going out. Sears, big box stores are starting to go out of business. So it'll be really exciting to see what comes out of that. And with what you said, being intentional, right? If you're not intentional, where are you going to end up on coming out of that? How much control do you have over that? All right, I'm going to ask a question that we try to ask everybody. We don't always hit it, but it's kind of, this will give you an opportunity to summarize too. Is what is success? What about success is important to Elton?
Or your definition of success, or how your definition of success has changed, over the last decade, I'd say.
Yeah, success is a big word. Like it's a big thing, and at the same time, like it's a really small thing to me. And I'll just give you my gut reactions and visceral reactions that come to it, because I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about it, to be honest. For me, I'm a big goal person, so I'll set goals and I'll follow through with them. I've found myself, and I've shared this a lot with my business partner, my wife, my really close friends over the past year and a half or so. I found myself setting goals and not meeting them over the past probably 16, 18 months. And it's been really odd for me because during the season of building ventures fast, like you do not miss goals or deadlines. And deadlines are always artificially set, right? They actually can pretty much always be moved around timeline-wise. But man, I couldn't tell you the number of weeks on end that, I'd put in until 2 a.m. to get things done. And so I find myself missing some of those things now and questioning like, oh, is that success or not? Like, am I slipping, or like what's happening with those types of things? And I think some of it is just seasonal, where I've got different priorities. And so I'm saying like, this isn't a priority right now. And when my end goal has been to like get set up in Seattle. And once I'm set up, then it's time to do work and do work well and hard and fast. And so there will be a change that happens there. And, my kind of support community is like excited for that to happen again. But I think success is, for me, around goal setting and then following through with that. And I think I've learned that if those goals aren't met, but it's an intentional choice to change it, that's also okay. And I say learned, I'm probably still learning that, rather. Like that's a hard thing for me to accept because, my history was like I put myself through college. I struggled financially. We didn't have a lot of money as kids growing up at all. I was the poor kid in the Catholic private school, and saw people getting cars given to them after they wrecked them and all that. So like for me, success was always around wealth creation. And I was listening to something a while ago, and somebody was like, "Hey, this poor guy that I know, like he has done everything in his life. He's got, multiple huge penthouses in Manhattan. He's got a wife, a family that loves him. He's got this great business, where he can be involved or not be involved as he wants. He's got all these things, and he's still not happy and doesn't consider himself successful." And I was like, why? And they said, well, because his definition of success had always been equated to physical health, and he's a little bit overweight. So he doesn't consider himself successful because he's got 95% of what he's always set out to do, but he's not a triathlete. And that struck me, and I've probably heard it 100 different times in different ways, but that one struck me because I have been a triathlete. I have completed a full distance Ironman. Like I have done all those things, and I was the inverse, where wealth creation was success. And so, and this probably happened 4 or 5 months ago when we were on the road, and I just told my wife, I was like, man, like what am I grinding so hard for here, when if I actually step back and look, like there's a lot of people that would consider me to be successful, but I don't consider myself to be, So that was a pretty profound kind of moment to start to restructure my definition of what success looks like. And now, mind you, there's been years where I've done very well financially, and I've built probably half a dozen businesses that have grown to multi-million-dollar ventures within 12 to 18 months. I mean, that's, for some people, like, wow, that's crazy. That's great success. And so I think wealth as a byproduct has become my definition of success, rather than wealth as a goal. And so
it's more of a measurement.
Well, it's more of a beneficial byproduct, right? If I'm actually successful in doing it right, then it's not that important in the grand scheme of things. And so I've started over this past year living my life differently, where the things that I would do with wealth are the things that I'm doing now. Like I would contribute, I would donate, I would help support other entrepreneurs, I would get involved, I'd get invested, I'd support new church plants because that's something I believe in. So I started doing that now. Like I'm just doing it on a smaller scale. And it's felt a heck of a lot better and felt way more, successful, to use that word, by just actually starting that process of engaging.
It's funny you say it, 'cause I was just talking to my wife about this the other day. How often do you say, if I ever win Powerball, I'll do X, Y, Z?
Yeah.
Well, why don't you just do X, Y, Z on a smaller scale?
Right.
You know, instead of giving $2 million to your nonprofit,
Right.
why don't you give $200 to your nonprofit?
Yeah. And the amazing thing is, like, you give $200, they actually really care.
Yeah.
Right. And it actually has an impact to the people that you're contributing to and to yourself. Right. Because you feel good about it. I mean, as humans, we're wired to feel good about giving. Like, we just feel better about it when we do it. And when we actually do it with a full heart, then, you know, that's really fulfilling. If we give out of some sort of desired reciprocal, you know, equation, it just doesn't work. But yeah.
Well, I love your answer to that question. If people want to learn more about you and your companies, where do they go?
Oh man, you can Google me for all the history stories. Google's got all the answers these days. I've got a website. I should probably start blogging again. I started writing.
I think you have a lot.
Or vlogging.
Or vlogging.
Yeah, the
It's
old,
just
the old
easier
video
to
blogs.
to do the vlogs. Yeah,
Just stand in front of your phone.
that would be good. I don't know. I actually really enjoy writing, and that's a goal for me in the future. So I've got a site, eltonrivas.com. It's just my name. It's
Okay.
out there. If you want to buy some hairpin legs, go to DIYhairpinlegs.com. Some other things I'm involved in are protoventures.com. That's out there.
Yeah, bring that one up really quick, Ryan.
Yes.
Tell me briefly about this.
So this is a just really organic, open group of venture builders, as it says. You know, they're people that are entrepreneurs, freelancers, designers, business folks, engineers, tech, you know, folks that have this kind of collaborative together. Some people are actively involved on a daily basis. I was early in that. And some of us now, where I'm kind of more of a remote network
is it like
partner.
consulting, or is it just?
No, so a venture studio will actually come up and develop its own ideas in-house, and then our process is to ideate, validate, go through and vet them, and then if they're good, give them resources to grow.
Gotcha.
And then eventually you'll spin it out and you'll find a CEO to run it, right? So it's kind of an inverse relationship to an accelerator program. Proto also has a consulting arm and those types of things as well to do external projects. But yeah, that's what it is.
Interesting.
Very cool.
Whenever I think of venture capitals, I always think of Wedding Crashers. 'Cause isn't that what they did?
Yeah, that's what they said they did.
That's what they said.
That's
yeah,
what they said
That's
they
right. That's right.
All right, Elton, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Check us out on Facebook. We're going to try to be a little more active on our Facebook page. Ryan posted for the first
Yeah,
time.
Facebook, Instagram, our website, thehuntforsuccesspodcast.com, YouTube. If you're not watching it there, you can get us on a few of your other podcasts.
I'm going to try to upload to Podbean and some others that are becoming more popular. We're going to try to upload there. Got some good episodes coming up. Eddie Short Fuse Herman is coming up next, and we have a whole lineup of guests coming. So,
Yeah.
all right, everybody, we'll see you next time. Thanks again, Elton.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks, guys.
Bye.